I'm Kim Pearson. I am a professor of journalism and interactive multimedia at the College of New Jersey. And I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Teresa Nakra, who is a professor of music and interactive multimedia at the College of New Jersey. And we are the directors of the Trenton Makes Music Project. And we are so delighted to welcome you to our first Trenton Makes Music program of the fall 2016 semester. This program is sponsored, received support from the New Jersey Council of the Humanities, as well as from the College of New Jersey. And we've had, in the 2 years since we've been working on this, great support from the Trenton Public Library. This is Laura Pohl, who's here, who is the archivist from the Trentoniana Room at the Trenton Public Library. If you have not been to the Trentoniana Room, you will be astounded at the treasures that await you there. Also, Jackie Dent Ivy here at Conservatory and the folks at Conservatory Mansion have just been a real lifeline of support for this project over the last 2 years. So without that further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our host for the evening, Ms. Sarah Dash, and she's going to tell you a bit about what we're going to be doing this evening and introduce you to Jackie Dent Ivy and to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Professor Naga. Before I discuss the program, I would like to introduce our host, Ms. Jackie. Would you come up and say a few words about the Trenton Conservatory and what it means to Trenton and how we got here?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Conservatory Mansion, former home of the Trenton Conservatory of Music. In the early 1900s, this building was a home that was created into a conservatory, music conservatory, by a professor at the School of Juilliard. His name was William O'Toole. He founded the Trenton Conservatory of Music. This was the only place where you could get a master's degree in music education. There was also dance and health and speech. We would love to do a documentary on this facility and a reunion. We found a number of people who have come through these doors. I actually took lessons here back in the 70s when I was in junior high in that very space that's now my office. And if anyone had told me 30 years later I would be owning the building, I probably would have laughed. But we are the third owners. My husband Sterick and I purchased the building in 2005. At the time, Isabel Kamensky, who succeeded William O'Toole, was in her 90s, and she was still teaching in here. And her attorneys told her, you know, it's about that time. And so we are not only the third owners, but we are the third, well, actually, as a former student of the Trenton Conservatory of Music, I am delighted to have my husband and I transform this space into an arts and cultural center for the city of Trenton to continue the arts here in Trenton. There's a lot of history in this building. There's a legacy in this building. We have a number of people who are putting Trenton Conservatory of Music in their obituaries even today. So it does have a lot of sentimental value. And it has 14 studios, 6 bathrooms, 4 levels. And we currently have a music studio and a band rehearsal space, and we rent the space out for various public events, private events, and currently the Tommy Grice Academy of Music is headquartered here at the conservatory on Saturday mornings, as well as Beyond Expectations team filmmaking program. We also have FS Sound Media and our house band called Good Company. So we have a lot of, and also Beth Daly, I almost forgot, she has a cultural resource library in our basement. So we welcome you to come at any time if you'd like to take a tour of the building. We are very delighted to be part of Trenton Makes Music, and we look forward to a great evening. Thanks again.
Thank you. Well, Trenton certainly knows where they can go and get a lot of culture and arts and music. I'm Sarah Dash, and I was asked to be the host and consultant and get in the way person for Trenton Makes Music. Trenton Makes Music came about through the studies of Professor Pearson, and she had me come to their school to do a seminar, which jump-started Teresa and Kim on let's do something about the history of music in Trenton. During my seminar, I spoke about different artists and who was there and how they started in Trenton and went on to become world-renowned. And, you know, being one of those people, it actually got me to thinking about what and how it would help our community to know the history of musicians and the greatness of musicians that came out of this city. Trenton has been on the borderline of creating a new cultural center as it stands, and the College of New Jersey is really jump-starting a lot of thought in this city for the arts. And with that, we have 2 more podcasts, and you will be able to meet great people who are making a difference, who have studied here, who are presenting music and the culture of bringing back an art form that has been lost here. We have a sign that says Trenton Makes and the World Takes. Well, we should start being smart enough to keep what's here. And so I think Trenton Makes Music is going, the program is going to make a lot of sense. Tonight, I'm not all that clear about what is going to be said here, but we have a great panel, wonderful panel. But before we start, I'm going to introduce one panelist. His name is Dr. Donald J. Dumpson. Dr. Dumpson has his PhD in classical African music, am I right? And Donald has played for me on many occasions. But before we go to him, I'm going to introduce you to my godson, Felton Rowe. Felton, will you give Donald the seat? Because he has suggested that I sing a song. And I'm going to sing a song, which is unusual. Dan, you get to hear me sing some gospel. Okay. So Donald suggested that I sing this song to kickstart the evening or to kick everybody out. I don't know what's going to happen. Okay. Why should I feel discouraged? Yeah, we're gonna do another key. Donald's always making me stretch. Okay, because whenever he can hear that I can do octaves, he'll change the key. So you music people understand that. You wanna take it down. Why? See how he teaches me? Should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows fall? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and our home? When Jesus is my portion, oh,
and I know he watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy. Oh, I sing because I'm free. Oh, his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. Oh, I sing because I'm happy. Oh, I sing because I'm free. Oh, his eye is on the sparrow, and I know. I know he watches over me. Yeah.
Okay, so we have the soprano, Miss Rochelle Ellis. Would you please stand? And she's an adjunct, an associate professor at Westminster Choir College, and I believe that is your, no longer, you were there. Donald also taught there. Yeah, you were together. So thank you. And sorry, I have all these papers. I usually have cue cards, but it didn't turn out that way. Our next panelist would be, and I'm reading without my glasses, would be Denise Ellis. No, Denise Leslie. I have them here. I'm nervous too, because this is not what I do. I'm sorry. Denise, would you please stand? Denise Ellis, Leslie is a diversity consultant who sits on the board of directors for Paul Robeson House in Princeton. And she recently gave a well-received presentation on Robeson at the Trenton City Museum. Now, this last name we're going to have fun with. John, could you say your last name?
Joe Pucciati.
Joe Pucciati is the director of Trenton's Opera House, as well as a longtime teacher in the music department of the Trenton High School. And he's the director of what you would be calling performing programs in November. Is there a title for that, or it's just fall seasons? Oh, no, I know you're coming to that, but yes, so he'll also be a part of the Trenton Makes music panel in November. Okay, so just stand up. So, and we also have someone that I'm very dear and friends with. His name is Dr. Daniel Spalding, and he is our maestro for the newly formed Trenton, New Jersey Philharmonic Orchestra, which is 3 years old. I happen to be on the board and a trustee, and our opening season starts October
22nd.
And we would love for all of you to come. It is one of the best orchestras around. We have 60 musicians, or now we got 75. Oh, I got to raise some more money. 75 musicians. The new program is going to be very interesting, and you'll talk about that later. Okay, so we got a few minutes here that I have to get all this together. I was just given this script today. Okay, so we're going to start. I'm going to sit down so that everybody can see the reactions of folks. Okay, I want to talk about the music that we have that comes from Trenton. And one of the things we want to speak about is how their music has been important to the city of Trenton back in the colonial days, starting with the barracks in Trenton, where they had fiddlers there, they had dances, they also had drummers, they kept the soldiers in time for the marching of the French and Indian Revolutionary Wars. Musicians from that time have always been important in wars, which is such an unusual thing, because what I want to do is talk to Dr. Dumpson about the importance of drum music and the contribution it made in our African, in our ancestral, groups of life. So could you please elaborate on that?
Sure. What I would do to frame that is I would love for you to think in terms of social cultural, not so much about the instrument, and think about systems of higher order music by people's mindset, lower order. So people will think that rap music is a lower order music and that Brahms is a higher order music. The thinking should be shifted to they're all extraordinary forms of music. And so what happens is we begin to start talking about implicit bias, the many things that goes into one's evaluation of what is considered good, worthwhile, worthy, what is not. And so from that lens, we then talk about Trenton, because unfortunately, Trenton is often considered, unless people come in. So for example, the New Jersey Symphony, I used to be the chorus master with them, and so you come into the War Requiem and you to the War Memorial, and you do your performances, but you go back out, and so there's this sense of this extraordinary thing coming in, and the real goal is to celebrate the orchestra that's here in Trenton.
Yes.
Is to really, really, as a community, go deep. And so before I even start talking about drums and Afrocentric and Africa and all of that, think about home. Think about this extraordinary city, and think about your perception of art here. Where does it fall in the scheme of things? You're between Philadelphia and New York. You have Princeton. So what do you think? And that's where we have to start with shifting. So I don't want to take too much time, but if I could just lay that framework, ladies and gentlemen, what is your perspective about, how many of you are from Trenton? Let me start by okay, think about this. What is your real perspective about this space? And I don't need the answer, but as we talk about all these things and the rich history musically here in Trenton, and I'm assuming that the discussion is remaining focused on Trenton, right?
Well, the history regarding how it affected you being a part of this city, having those things here, but never really brought to fruition. So having experts like you all to talk about.
Great.
Yeah.
So what I would do to bring the African lens in is actually go to something we have here in Trenton called the Black Church.
And
So-
I was about to make that point, because also here we talk about the Fifth Jubilee Singers when
Right.
they first came to Trenton to do a concert, and I'm sure that the two of you could elaborate on that at some point.
Right. So I'm not sure of the chronology. I wish we all had a copy of what you have so we can kind of know where it's going.
Well,
No, it's okay. It's okay. I don't want to take too much time. What I would say to kind of pull it into some sort of framework, again, Fifth Jubilee singers, no home, no place where they could be, traveling around the world to raise money because of a lack of being included, So this this extraordinary institution called Fisk University, a historically black college, a place that allowed people of African descent to have a place to be educated. Just think about that. Think about the impact that that had. So when we start thinking about the African drums, African choral music, all of this, it's I don't want to bog down the comment.
No.
It's a whole, that's
It
an
becomes
entire,
a whole yes,
right, so I don't
do
want to say too much
understand.
more.
But, also in my notes, it says, one of the places that the Fisk singers were housed was the Masonic Temple, the Masonic Hall. And it was probably one of the most prominent black concerts that happened in the city of Trenton.
Mm-hmm.
So we thank you, Donna,
Thank
for
you.
that. Now, when we think of classical composers from Trenton, we think about George Antheil. And could you please, Mr. Anastasio, talk about what that, a bit
right,
about
well,
George?
George was actually a young blonde-haired German boy who was born over on Davies Street, which is now called Stokely Avenue. It's right next to the Mott Elementary School, is where he came from. They moved over to 2nd Avenue near the prison, and then they ended up again over at McKinley, over near the high school. They were a family that owned a shoe store. The shoe store was on North Broad, I think, and it's now what is the area where Mercer County Community College is.
Okay.
So that's the family. This is 1900, and at 1900, Trenton is booming. Trenton has got the pottery industries, it's got the rubber industry, it's making cars, pianos, radios, a million different things, and it is really a hot place to live. And young George, at the age of 6, tells his family he wants a piano. Now, to give you some idea of this guy's personality, they give him a piano, but he wants a real one, and they give him one of those little small ones, that you get the ticks, which he immediately took down into the basement and chopped up with a hatchet. He wanted, at that age, a real piano. He knew that he wanted a piano, and the story goes that the two ladies who lived next door to them on 2nd Avenue constantly played their piano, and he was introduced to the sound of this piano because it went day and night. And there is a myth that they were doing it because they were trying to cover up the sound of tunneling from the state prison. Well, it's a wonderful story, but they were living, it's about 4 blocks away from the prison, so there was no way that would happen, but it makes a wonderful story. But he fell in love with the piano, and at a very early age decided that he wanted to be a pianist and a composer. When he went to school, eventually he went to Trenton High School, and he studied with the music teacher there who just started to teach him composition. George did not want to listen to the music teacher. He wanted to go off on his own and do what he wanted to do. Right. Music teachers were forcing him to do Bach and Beethoven and all the traditional stuff that you learn. Yes. George said, no, I want to be what I want to be. And, well, to make a long story short, the music teacher hung himself. And George never finished high school. He was a thoroughly incorrigible young man. Who really just wanted to be a musician, a pianist. He later becomes a world traveling concert pianist. And after his days in Trenton, he spent a lot of time, he studied, for instance, with the famous composers, and his mentor, his mentor, I have to say his backer, was Bach. Bach, yes, Mary, whose middle name was Curtis, by the way, and she was the person who endowed the Curtis Institute. She was the publisher of the Saturday Evening Post, I believe. And she backed him and said, okay, you want to be a concert pianist, you got to go to Europe. And so she paid for him to go to Europe, and he studied, he practiced constantly, and to the point where he practiced 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and he had such a heavy-handed fist that he literally wore through the keys on one piano, down to the wood. Wow. Well, if you've ever heard his piano music that he wrote later on, you'll understand why that's possible to do, because if you've ever tried to play it, that's as far as I can get. I can try. but basically there is a lot of heavy-handed stuff going on there. And it was in Europe that he really took that personality of his that was kind of fighting the powers that be. And in Paris at the time, we're looking at after World War I, when he finally comes into his 20s, and he is now with Stravinsky, who he loves. He absolutely worships Stravinsky. And you hear, when you listen to his later music, a lot of Stravinsky in his music. There's a lot of the polytonalities and polyrhythms and everything else. In fact, in one of his pieces, there are 600 different time changes. I mean, that for any music to try and go through that, it's pretty hard.
Wow.
But he becomes part of what is called the Futurism music movement in Paris, with these people who are trying to take the old. You have to understand that at the turn of the century, we're talking Brahms.
Yeah.
By the time we get to the 1920s, we are now looking at the influences of American jazz.
Yes.
We are looking at what's going on with people like Stravinsky.
Yeah.
And the people that he's hanging out with, by the way, that he's practically living with, would be some of the biggest names in the art world.
Okay. Which
At
brings
all.
me to another place here in the script. Would he have been with Robeson? Because during the 30s and the 40s, Robeson was here, and there was something that I'm reading here that says that he was a human rights activist, and they had a case here in Trenton called the Trenton 6, and I'd like for Ms. Leslie to elaborate on that, and perhaps maybe you could cross-reference
He
some of
probably never was in the same room with Robeson unless he was writing movie music for one of Robeson's films, because that's basically what he did toward the end of his life. But in fact, Antheil, after he left Europe, did not come back to New Jersey. He lived in New York for a while and then went to California, where he spent the rest of his life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So, Miss Leslie, do you care? We would like to hear you talk about the Trenton Six and what Robeson's role was during that time.
Certainly. The Trenton Six is considered the Northern Scottsboro Boys case. And it was some years later, but quite frankly, a similar circumstance where a white business owner was murdered in his shop, and the press was very concerned that it wasn't being solved quickly. They quickly scooped up a number of African-American young men, same situations we have today, where confessions were beaten out of them. They were forced to confess to something that they did not do. They were a very short trial and quickly convicted, and then off they were to their death, essentially. But Paul Robeson and others learned of this travesty of justice, and he, among others, brought, given that he had such a broad network of friends, not only other performers, but other activists and people who were well known in their lifetimes, not just in the New Jersey area or in this country, they were known all over the world. His leadership brought people to Trenton to, first of all, make this story without internet, without all the social media we have now. They made it into a international story of horror. How could you rush these young men to their deaths when they had nothing to do with this crime, essentially? And the other thing I'd like to say about Robeson is he was as famous as Beyonce or Prince or Michael Jackson in his day, and from a very young part of his life. And he had to face all kinds of adversity, first at Rutgers when he received his scholarship, when he was on the football team and having the other white players not wanting him there, to the point where he graduated very high in his class with honors and was the commencement speaker. He was just an extraordinary person. But he would always lend his name to these causes. He was that nail that stood up, that kept getting hammered down, and he didn't care. They're talking about the new Jim Crow. He was there with the Jim Crow. He would speak out at a time when lynchings were natural happenstances for very outspoken black people, and he would still be outspoken. In fact, he had an opportunity to have a meeting with Truman and insisted on anti-lynching laws, which of course did not get passed at the time. But because he wouldn't be silent, he refused to be silent, even against the House Un-American Committees Act. And we have wonderful YouTube of him and his reaction and comments to that committee. He called the senators the un-American people. They were the un-Americans because they were here trying to have Robeson name names and brand him as a communist,
Yes.
when in fact he was someone who loved workers. He loved workers all over the world, and they ended up loving him too.
Well, you know, it's just, it really is kind of similar to what America is experiencing today with all the young men who are innocently killed. As we know, it continues, and we have an issue here in this country. It's a racial issue. It's an issue that some people are trying to bury their heads in the sand about. But I don't understand how someone can injure 26 people and 2 men can hold their hands up in the air and get killed. And they didn't kill, and they didn't do anything but just get out of their cars. But I think the arts and all of us here probably would agree that I think we had a community that always embraced each other. You can talk about Sammy Davis Jr. with Frank Sinatra, when Sammy couldn't even stay in the same hotel as Frank Sinatra. But they still had a camaraderie that went beyond what we saw in our social society.
And this goes back to that frame of reference that I suggested earlier. And again, not a good or bad, not a right or wrong, but where are you in reference to your
Absolutely.
perspective of what
Thank
you're
you,
here.
Don. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this concludes, I thank all of you. This concludes our panel for the classical music. I think Donald's going to stay around. Miss Leslie, you're going to be here?
I'll hang around.
Okay, Miss Leslie, why do I do that? And so we're going to dismantle this panel and start with the sacred. We'll take a few minutes break. Are we giving refreshments now? Yes, there'll be some refreshments back there. Don't stay back there eating too long because we have another panel. Okay? All right. Thank you guys so much. God bless you.